What I want to demonstrate is a flatbed knitting machine technique, and it's a drawstring cast on, or sometimes referred to as the weaving cast on. So I figured out how to do it on my little machine here, and I'm casting on or knitting a few rounds of waste yarn. So I'm going to stop my carriage at 6 o'clock because my needle number 1 is over here at 3 o'clock. So I want to go ahead and start lifting needles into the what I call the upper working position. They're not going to be in hold, they're still going to be allowed to knit, but this is going to make the weaving easier. So if you pull your needle up as if you're going to put it in hold, and when the loop stops in that little curved, get a needle out, just pull it up enough to where the yarn rests in this little curved area, and your latches still need to be open, but the loop is going to, the weaving that we're fixing to do is going to rest just underneath the latch of every other needle, but it's going to be in this working area right here. So we're not going to put the needles in hold, we're going to leave them in work. But go ahead and start lifting them just to that point, all the way around. And you'll feel it when it slips into that little spot. And just double check your latches are open. And then my dog's going to decide to get into my yarn while I'm trying to do this. Alright, sorry for the interruption. I'm going to just lift as far as I can go, and that's about it. So I'm going to finish knitting my waste yarn up to where needle number 1 drops that stitch below and gets ready to grab the waste yarn. Here's my needle number 1 right here. And it's just going to get ready. It's starting to go down. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my waste yarn, and then I'm going to finish pulling these needles up so that I don't forget to do it. And I am checking the latches as I go. So I can't do these yet. So what I want to do is, now I've still got the waste yarn in my carrier because it's the way I like to do it. Put some contrasting yarn here, which I'm going to call my main yarn. Go ahead and thread that up. And so if you have a slotted carrier or a non-slotted carrier, you can still do this. So I'm going to go ahead and thread my main yarn in to where it's going to knit with the waste yarn in that first needle. But before I go any farther, I'm going to have to measure out a long tail. So what you want is, and I'm holding on to the waste yarn so it doesn't pull back through, is you want double the circumference of your cylinder, and that'll give you plenty so that you don't run out. So I'm going to drop that long tail down inside there, get all these stitches back where they need to be, because that one has not knit yet and I don't want to drop that stitch. So get your waste yarn and your main yarn ready to go, and I'm going to check that again in a minute. So I'm going to check all my latches of the needles that I've pulled up, and I'm going to begin weaving this yarn in and out of those needles, and I'm going to come around the right side, or this side of my needle number 1, and I'm going to just kind of hold that down and go behind needle number 2, in front of needle number 3, and in and out. And my hand may be in the way on some of these, but I also can use my hook to hold things down just to get started. And I'm going to switch over to my right hand. So we're going in front of every other needle. And I'm going to do this as far as I can. And this long tail is going to be your drawstring. So I need to stop here and check, make sure I didn't skip any needles or double up anywhere. And I'm going to hold on to this so it doesn't get tangled. And I'm going to push this yarn down just to make sure that needle number 1 is going to grab the waste yarn and the new yarn. And just let that needle grab a hold, and once it closes over both of those yarns, I'm going to pull the waste yarn through because we don't need it anymore. So now all of these needles should knit if I have the latches open and they are still in working position. So I'm going to move over to 12 o'clock so that I can finish pulling these needles up into upper working position. And I don't need to do needle number 1, but now I need to finish weaving. Don't want to forget to do that. Alright, so I'm checking myself here. It's going behind the last needle, and I'm going to bring it around in front of the first needle just so I can anchor that in. And you see I had just enough of a tail left over by measuring out 2 times the circumference of the cylinder. I'm going to put a little weight on that. So I finished up weaving here on the last needle, went behind that one and back in front of needle number 1. So I can carefully knit forward, and that latch is closed right there, so you want to make sure. So what's happening is that long tail has been just kind of woven through, so it's not really anchored into a stitch, and it's going to be easy to pull up on it and gather things up. So I'm going to go ahead and knit my make-believe project, and then I'll show you how to bind off on the machine, but you're going to have to use a tapestry needle at the end, but it's pretty easy. So this is only if you prefer to do it on the machine. When you get to the end, you can just cast off on waste yarn and do your tail with a needle and thread or a needle. And but I'm going to try to do this whole thing on the machine. So I'll be right back. Okay, on my last round of my project, I'm going to stop the carriage over here at 6 o'clock, and I'm going to go ahead and start with needle number 1 and put all of the needles in hold, and that's going to drop those live stitches below the latch. And then I'm going to go ahead and finish knitting those last few stitches until the carriage clicks, the last click, and finish putting all of my needles in hold. So now I can leave a pretty good tail, just maybe one that'll go around the cylinder one time. You don't really need a lot because you're going to draw it up anyway. So I've cut that off, and I'm going to leave it dangling there. And so I'm just going to go ahead and move this carriage out of my way over here to 12 o'clock for now, and I'm going to start with needle number 1 and just drop those needles. The stitches should hang on for now, but you want to be careful and not move the carriage in that direction because it's going to drop those off. So I'm going to take this tail, wherever it ended up, and thread my needle. A bent needle is nice to have. But you can do it with any kind. So what I want to do is, I like to do it from the outside of the machine. Hopefully I stay out of the way. I'm going to push this needle forward. See if I can zoom in a little bit right there. Keep my hands out of the way. And I'm going to push it forward, and then I'm going to poke my needle through there and secure that stitch. and then just keep going around doing that. And so those stitches, even if they fall off of the needle, they're not going anywhere because I've just now locked them in with my drawstring. You want to try not to split any yarn because it makes it hard to pull that stitch through. And to me, this is easier than the waste yarn because I can see this a lot better than trying to pick out those stitches that are contrasting with the waste yarn. And once you get this off the machine, everything kind of sinks into each other. And sometimes I have to really search for the stitches. So I like to do things at the machine as much as possible. So I'm going to keep going here. And I just want to show when I do get my carriage over to the spot that I dropped those, I'm hitting some latches here, where I dropped those stitches, those are going to start dropping off. But let me get a little bit farther, and see, now I've switched to my left hand, so it's going to slow me down. I'm going to go a little bit farther so you don't have to watch me do this, and I'm just going to leave the carriage there for now. Okay, I've gotten to this point over here where I need to drop a few more needles. I know my hand has been in the way most of the time, but it's just the way it is. Alright, so I'm going to start moving my carriage just so I can show you that these stitches are going to start dropping off right there. And if you have your weight on, it's going to, cause you problems unless you go ahead and just remove the weights, or when the needles pop back up again, you can just reach down here and grab something and hang them on there just to hold on. I like to leave my weights in because it does make it kind of easier. I can remove part of my weight and kind of slack up on that a little bit, and my tail's getting kind of short, so I may need to kind of start the drawstring if I can, but you need to maybe leave a little bit more than one length of the cylinder. So do as I didn't do and leave a little bit more insurance there, because I am getting pretty close to running out. But I can just release all this and just draw it up if I need to. So I should be able to make it to the end. But I think you get the idea what's going to happen, even if I can't show you all the way to the end. Oops, caught on that screw there. Alright, I'm going to bump a few more of these off and then just hang them up there like that. So I'm not able to draw this up to get any more length on my thread, so I'm just hoping that I don't run out. Because it's hard to draw it up while it's still on the needles. Almost done. And my last one, I've got a little bit of yarn left, and I made it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my weight and pull down and drop this thing off of the machine. So there you see the drawstring on that end. That's pretty normal. So I'm going to get the waste yarn taken off of this other end and come right back. I'm removing the last little bits of my waste yarn so I can show you which end we started on, because you won't be able to tell, they look the same. So that yarn that we wove in and out of the stitches, it just kind of, the needles, it just kind of runs in a straight line through the stitches, and you see on every other needle, on this one it runs in, I don't know how to explain it, but across the right leg of the stitch, and on this one it runs in the other way, but it doesn't matter. It's kind of in a mirror image all the way through. It doesn't matter whether it's like that or not. You just draw it up. And you can also do this with half of your needles, like if you want the top to be less bulky, you can only cast on with every other needle if you want to, and make this a lot prettier on the top. But there you have. Once you remove the waste yarn, this thing will not unravel, and it also won't unravel on the other end because we secured those stitches with our needle. And so I hope you enjoyed this technique on how to do the drawstring cast on and bind off at the machine.